When he first appeared on the motion picture screen, he was a grotesque figure of horror and fright. A repugnantly ugly, blood-sucking vampire portrayed in one of the first horror movies ever made, Nosferatu, the Undead.
In the past 500 years, Professor, those who have crossed my path have all died, and some not pleasantly. Come here.
But over the decades, Dracula has changed, and Frank Langella, the man who portrays him in his most recent screen incarnation, no longer sees this as a horror movie, nor Dracula as the villain.
I don't think of him as evil. I really don't. It's a terrifying movie. It's meant to not to terrorize, but to add a certain degree of terror to your visual enjoyment of it. But it's basically a film about a man who falls in love with a woman and wants to take her through the ages with him. What would it be like to be a man who wants to live a life as decently as he can, but who has a curse that he can't really share with anyone else, and to approach it from that point of view, rather than just starting out with, I'm a vampire and here I come to suck your blood.
Langella has indeed invested Dracula with human qualities, but the motion picture still portrays him as an evil force.
This is a creature who is undead. This is a man who roams the earth and can never know death, doesn't have any end to his life. And in order to stay alive, he must go through a certain process that each of us can understand, because we have all kinds of ways that we keep alive. Even though we don't see an end in sight, we know there's an end in sight. I think Dracula taps that in us. He taps our own need for some kind of immortality, or a sense of immortality, or reassurance that we're going to make it through the next day. He needs a reassurance he's going to make it through the next century.
Dracula has indeed proved immortal, at least on the motion picture screen. His origins date back to the 15th century, based on a Slavic nobleman named Count Dracula, affectionately known as Vlad the Impaler, for his disconcerting habit of sticking his enemies up on poles. It was upon this ghoulish figure that Bram Stoker based his now famous Gothic novel, Dracula. The thirsty Count became the subject of plays and motion pictures. Bela Lugosi terrified audiences in the role for 20 years. It is said he was buried in his cape. And over the decades, others have attempted to fill his coffin with a variety of characterizations, from hair curling to side splitting. He has even become a pitchman for the Big Apple.
I love New York, especially in the evening.
For that man, Frank Langella, the part of Dracula would become his most famous since he set out on the stage at age 7.
I was very young when I decided I wanted to be an actor. I was about 7 or 8 years old. And it took a fairly standard route when you want to be a performer. I then went to New York City as a teenager. Then I went away to Europe for a while, came back, worked in small summer stock theaters, worked in off-Broadway houses for $15 a weekend. Then I got an equity card and worked in an off-Broadway show, which led to some Broadway offers, which led to some films.
And that eventually led to a role in The 12 Chairs by Mel Brooks, then Diary of a Mad Housewife, and an offer to portray the Count Dracula in a Broadway revival. Langella was skeptical. He didn't want to portray the stereotypical vampire, and agreed to do the part only after stipulating a special clause in his contract.
What did the contract say?
It said that I would never be asked to or would wear fangs. I had it put in writing. Usually you see a Dracula who's always stalking the earth all night long, looking for blood, ripping open the throats of animals, and doing rather grotesque things to get what he wants. But if he's around as long as this man is, he's developed a certain philosophy, a certain kind of humor, hopefully, and a certain degree of taste. You know, like, I'm not going to get it that way. I'm going to wait for that beautiful beauty over there and take it that way.
Langella doesn't need frightening fangs nor blood-stained lips to portray his Dracula. The appeal is on a much more human level. Langella's Dracula may evoke gasps of fear, but it also draws other types of gasps as well.
The erotic side of the character and the sensual side of the character fascinate me a lot. I mean, what he What he inspires in women's fantasies fascinates me. I spoke to a great many women when I was researching the character and trying to figure out what it was that they found so appealing about him. And most of them said it was the notion of some kind of contact with a male that was above and beyond mere mortal contact that we can provide, that this character would take them into some world they'd never been before, and somehow they all felt they could survive it. And occasionally women say, I could be the one who could change him. Vampires are, a fascinating subject, and we always tend to forget when we talk about vampires that they're first men, and they're first men with all the male needs and all the male wants and all the male desires. And if you were to imagine yourself, if someone were to give you some magic potion and say, by taking this once a day, you can stay alive, if anybody tried to take it away from you, you'd do everything you could to get it back in order to stay alive. And if it meant perhaps hurting others in a certain way, I think we'd all do it. I have a feeling we'd all do it. And that, to go back to your original question, I think is the attraction. And also at the same time, the thing that frightens us is that we all know we're capable of going to any lengths in order to stay alive as long as we can.
Forgive me, Doctor. I dislike mirrors. They are the playthings of man's vanity.
You are a most unusual creature, Count Dracula.
Yes.
And apparently, a creature who will live forever. We'll be back in a moment.